this idea that the United States is going to defend Europe because it's like a partner. Well, a partner in what? So in other words, what does the United States get from it? So in other words, that Trump transactionalism it's not like pointing towards the truth of the matter, but it points towards a strong element of a reckoning that would have to have happened anyway. And so the liberals, like the Biden administrations of the world, they want to preserve like the European bloc in part for like classical US imperial interest, meaning like from that same realpolitik transactional perspective, what can Europe give you? Europe is in some ways like a buffer against other problems. Like Europe becomes like your East Asian, it's your West Asian fortress against a savage Russia. This is from like the Vance perspective, the Kissinger's perspective, but also from like the problems of the Middle East. In other words, like the way the U.S. thinks of Israel in the Middle East, like that role that it plays, it wants or needs Europe to play that role in Western Asia, or else what the fuck's it for? So like it needs,
and part of you is also like, well, what does Israel get out of it, and what does Europe get out of it? To flip it around, because it's like if they in that transaction, it's like we're here to serve as a buffer to your fucking interest in the region, which means we have to sit here and our population has to like absorb missiles and terrorist attacks and shit, so that you can like have access to fucking natural resources in the area and not have like the greater threat be pushing through. Like that's fucking insane. They don't get anything out of it either.
I mean, think about it this way: Europe doesn't have any natural resources except its cities.
Right.
And its people to a certain extent. So in other words, like if you're going to extract value from Europe, there's no technology and there's no energy. So the only thing left is like intellectual property, human capital, and this idea that it's like a military sponge that's like, we saw this with Syria, that's meant to regulate irregular flows and trafficking of human beings who are emerging out of war zones. Like that's what it's for.
Yeah.
So it needs to do those things,
right,
or else it doesn't have a function. And that's
but by doing those things, it lights up the right wing.
Well, yeah. And the thing is also, yes, it does. And this is also the weird like power block politic behind the white civilization argument, or the white Christian nationalist concern for Europe, which is the paranoid thesis isn't just that if like key primary European states like Germany like become majority Muslim in say 2040, 2050, that those states will like be led by barbarians, like in like the birth of a nation, like African Americans are now in charge of the Southern governments, like like Ku Klux Klan. Like in other words, it's not just like racial paranoia that's at stake here. Like part of their thinking is, if those states are majority Muslim, that their like political and economic like sympathies, like channels, directions, sentiments won't be aligned anymore with like, I guess how you like Western Christian or white Christian states. They're going to be facing Turkey. They're going to be facing the Saudis. They're going to be facing Indonesia. In other words, like their imagination of like Muslim identity is that like the religious component of the population's identity will be a more important factor in how like mass politics are produced than like historic nationalist politics. In other words, like if Germany is like majority Muslim in 2050, they're imagining that like the German orientation, because it's Muslim, will sort of drift to Turkey, the Saudis, Indonesia. Like it'll become part of like a Central Islamic Asian. Like
look at how they talk about Mamdani's victory in New York. I mean, it's like absurd. They're just like, well, I guess the Bible's going to be illegal in New York now. And you're like, well, is that really what's happening? It seems sort of like you guys sound